Welcome, everybody. Claire Wasserman here, founder and author of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform, global community, and of course, a book, as you can tell, that is dedicated to helping women earn more and live better. If you've been following along, you see that for the past couple of weeks, although now I think that's turned into months, I've been going live every day or as many days as I can, just trying to kind of spread the knowledge of ways that you can become your own biggest champion and work money in life. And to help me do that, I've been asking various coaches on who specialize in aspects of self-championship in work, money, and life. And today is going to be all about money, although, money kind of is life. It's hard to separate it. And so we have an amazing coach on today, Kimberly Hamilton, who's the founder of Beworth Finance. I'm going to have her go more into like her story, how she got here, what she, specializes in. But correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of what you do is about helping people build wealth who maybe think that they don't have much wealth to begin with. So that's certainly part, logistics, but also part mindset. And so that is going to be a real focus for today, which is now just tell me real quickly. Okay. So I know when you wrote me in, you said, you think it's easy for the general public to look at people who are considered, quote, good with money and that they've always been that way or they had a lot of luck, but that in reality, a lot of us, get into this field because we overcame financial challenges. So having a lot of financial challenges does not equal bad with money. In fact, it sounds like it's a pretty awesome opportunity to really take command of your life circumstances. But Kim, I want to welcome you to I was going to say podcast, but that's not what this is, to the LinkedIn Live. If you could talk a little bit more about what you do, and then we'll get into our topic for today.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Claire. Excited for everyone that's joining today. So my name's Kimberly. As Claire mentioned, I work, talk, write about money pretty much all the time. I'm the founder of Beworth Finance, which is a company I started in 2019 to help women and mostly a millennial audience just really take command and get confident in their finances. And to your point, Claire, a lot of people that come to me might feel like they're not good with money. It's not always quite a perception thing, though. A lot of people are struggling with debt in America, so that's a very common thing to have that I help clients with one-on-one. I also have online courses to help them figure out not only the mindset shifts they need to make to motivate themselves and sort of take those baby steps, which I think we're going to get into today when it comes to their finances, but also strategically, how can they make the most of what they have, even if they might be starting with, low amounts of income or might not have a ton of money to save or invest off the bat. So I do that through my company, Beworth Finance. I also recently came out with a book, Building Wealth on a Dime, which I'm excited to talk about today. And I'm also the senior manager of financial education at a personal finance app called Rocket Money, which some people may have heard of. They're most well known for helping you cancel your subscriptions, but we also have really a slew of financial features to help empower people with their money there as well.
Awesome. How did you get into this field?
Yeah, so for me, to the point that I wrote in about really overcoming my own financial challenges. I didn't grow up learning about money. I didn't grow up in a family where, money was sort of hidden, or a lot of people have negative feelings related to money. That wasn't my case, but no one was really strategic with it. I went to school for a lot of economics and worked 10 years in international development. I got a master's, and I thought that the master's would equate to a higher income that I actually ended up with, which is also very common. And so when I moved to Washington, D.C., I had $45,000 worth of student debt. And that caused a lot of financial anxiety for me because I didn't know one, and my family was really familiar with debt. I was the first on my mom's side to go to college. And so figuring out how to be strategic about paying that down, how much I needed to hustle and generate additional income in order to expedite that was a learning curve. But ultimately, I was able to figure that out, developed a process that I teach clients today for automating their finances that frees up a lot of mental space and helped reduce that financial anxiety that I had. And ultimately, I was able to pay down that debt in 3 years. And it wasn't until about 2 years after that I actually got into the personal finance industry, talking about things with friends like salary negotiation, which I know you're a pro at and really advocate for, Claire, and other things related to finances that I realized there was a market for information that was just more relatable, that wasn't really being talked about in a lot of my peer groups or with my family.
Oh, 1,000%. Um, I would love, I mean, before we get into your book, Building Wealth on a Dime, if you could maybe give some tips for people who are also in debt and they hear, wow, you did $45,000 in 3 years.
Yeah.
Just any tips for those folks of how to begin tackling such a monster?
Sure. I think a major one for me, and again, part of it was really getting over that anxiety to just like get started. So there are plenty of calculators you can use out there to find out how you might accelerate that debt pay down, even with small amounts. So don't think that you need to have, like hundreds of extra dollars laying around. Any additional dollar you can put makes a difference. I suggest automating as much as your financial life as you can. So that not only goes for debt pay down, but things like savings transfers, if you're in a position to be able to invest as well. I think that's something that can really free up a lot of mental space so you can focus on how to be strategic. And then there are things like, obviously, to accelerate that debt pay down, you may be interested or trying to generate additional income. Luckily, there are a lot more ways to start side hustles and things like that now, but the biggest impact you can make there is negotiating your salary. So I encourage everyone to check out some of the resources you have on your site, Claire, for doing that, because when I moved to DC, I had a $40,000 starting salary. So if I stayed at that level, it wouldn't have been possible for me to pay down that amount of debt in 3 years. So that was key there. And that can be a really scary conversation. But doing the most you can to sort of prepare for those conversations with your supervisor, with your manager, will help in that situation.
Do you have and to be clear, this is not financial, what we have to say some disclosure, right? Like, this is not financial advice, but like just personal stories about what's worked for me. So for you, how did you calculate the percentage of what you felt was appropriate to spend on paying down the debt?
Sure. So like I said, I really didn't understand how compound interest works in general when I first took out my student loans, which is really common. Interest is essentially the amount that you owe whatever lender for borrowing that money to begin with. And I had mostly federal student loans, so the interest rates were relatively low compared to things like credit cards, if anyone watching is dealing with credit card debt. But so plugging that into one of those calculators can be helpful, because you can see, for me, I was obviously limited by some of the income I was making or side jobs I could pick up. But it was helpful for me to see the impact that, an extra $50, an extra $100 could make. As my income grew, I was able to put an extra $500 a month, an extra $1,000 a month. I think sort of getting that wheel initially turning was really motivating for me as well, seeing that I was able to pay it down more quickly, because had I taken the full 10 years to pay off those student loans, I would have spent essentially almost an additional 50% in interest. So thinking $40,000 of student loans that I took out, I think it would have been around $16,000, $17,000 worth of interest over the 10 years. So I really wanted to shorten that period. The other thing that people can check out when it comes to student loans, depending on the type you have, you might consider refinancing those loans. If you have federal student loans, you want to be careful about that, because the second you refinance, that's going to be through a private lender, and you would lose some of the federal protections that have come in really handy for people during the pandemic, right? The pause on a lot of these student debt repayments. But if you have private loans, that might definitely be worth considering to lower that interest rate to make it a little bit more manageable to pay back.
Okay, awesome. Now I want to talk about your book, Building Wealth on a Dime. So what does that mean? And then if you want to walk us through kind of the overview of what you cover in the book, and we can get into some tangible tips, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Building Wealth on a Dime. The idea is starting small with whatever you have, right? But really making these changes to your everyday life, building these habits that enable you to have a large impact, not just to your mental well-being, but obviously your finances over time. And so the book teaches readers how to do things like set up a budget, which I want to give a big disclaimer here that doesn't mean a budget has to be restrictive, right? It's really a tool to help you allocate the income that you have towards savings and investments and things that you want to be able to spend money on in your life. So reframing a budget in general is helpful there, but teaching people how to budget, how to invest with as little, as $20, $50. You don't need to have hundreds or thousands of dollars to invest anymore, which is really exciting, I think. And how to, maybe save a bit smarter, doing all of that through the stories of everyday people, which I call money makers in my book. 4 fictional characters. One is actually my own story. So for each character, you'll see, detailed budgets before and after, using what I call the money move structure and how I set up and help clients automate their finances. You'll see those changes throughout the book through each of those characters. And I hope that makes it more relatable to people because, like you said, money and life are so intertwined. When I was talking with the publisher about writing the book, I said that I have to make it about people because we all have different circumstances and relationships and incomes and jobs and things that impact our money every day, and vice versa. So I hope readers get a kick out of that and that it helps demonstrate some of the concepts that I walk them through a bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. How did you pick what money stories or money makers, these archetypes, like which one, what do each of them represent and how did you decide on those?
Yeah, so that was actually a really fun process. I mean, I've worked with, quite a few clients over the years now, but they haven't all been inspired by them. There's family members, there's friends. I think even though a lot of people are still shy or hesitant to talk about money, you don't realize just how much it's still talked about all the time. So there were common instances, I think, to pull from to develop each of the circumstances that the characters or myself were dealing with at that time. So that was actually a really fun process, talking about probably my favorite character is Tanya in Chicago. And she's 34 years old, first generation Latina. And she started investing in her 401k, I think when she was about 30, but she's really just learning about the financial independence, retire early movement. And so she's really trying to wrap her mind around how she can start investing more aggressively, even though she feels like she might have started later than her peers. And that's a really common instance. So walking through how much should she be investing for retirement? What type of accounts should she be setting up? How much should she be saving on a monthly basis? All of those are really common questions that I think people ask themselves when they're just getting started. But really the overall theme of the book is starting small, but dreaming big. I have these $6 million habits, I call them, and they're things that I feel have impacted my financial journey more than any amount of debt I've ever owed or income I've ever made. And the top $1 million habit that I weave throughout the book is starting small but dreaming big, because I think it's those initial baby steps that really, one, help people feel like they have some sense of control, right? Like you may not be exactly where you want to be with your money or your career, but developing a plan to get there is something that I've seen, certainly with myself, but also with clients, that really helps people get on the right track and start making the moves that they need to see those big changes over time.
Did you say $6 million habits?
As in 6?
Oh God, $6 million. I was like, that's very specific number. Listen, we still like $1 million. It's not as good as 6 million, but still damn good. Tell us what those tips are. I mean, without giving away too much of the book, if we could spend the next, 10 minutes at least, just kind of going through tangibly those next steps. And also, if you want to answer the questions that you posed around the retiring early movement, the questions that Tanya has, like, I'd love to know the answers to them as well.
Sure, yeah. I won't get into all the $1 million habits because I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah.
But some of the more actionable things you could do, when I say start small, dream big, when it comes to your finances, that can be as small of an action as, automating one savings transfer per month. Or in the book, I teach users how to calculate a weekly spending cap. And the idea with that spending cap is that you've already, covered your fixed expenses for the month. You've already made any savings, debt, or investment contributions that you need to make for the month. And then you're just using this one weekly spending cap to sort of monitor your spending, as opposed to nickel and diming everything. Those are 2 really small things that someone can do. You can calculate, that spending cap in probably the span of 30 minutes, even if you've never looked at your finances before, because that can take a little while to gather some of that information. And you can automate a savings transfer really easily through really any financial institution that you have these days. And those are two really small examples of things you can do to take off some of that mental load that when it comes to your money, but also help you get in the habit of building that muscle. So each month you're starting to save, then you figure out how each month you can start to invest a little bit more. And through things like compound interest, obviously that money will hopefully grow over time. Savings themselves, high yield savings rates are also very high right now. So I encourage anyone viewing to check out your bank. It's like the one silver lining of inflation. That interest rates for high yield savings accounts are also higher. So instead of, most big banks used to have interest rates of 0.01%, you could get anywhere between 200, 400 times a higher interest rate on your savings by checking out usually online banks, though there are some brick and mortar options now they're starting to catch up to, so that's great. So that's one example of small steps that you can take. Automation is another $1 million habit in the book. So the money move structure is sort of the system that I help the characters and walk through my own finances as well in the book as to how I set that up. So you're not, again, sort of, I would say, wasting mental energy figuring out like, did I pay this bill? Did I cut that check? Did I make this transfer? The more you can automate, the more I think you free up mental space to really get excited about what your money can do for you moving forward instead of feeling like you're constantly behind. And again, I think for those viewing that may be dealing with debt or in life too, like maybe you feel like you're not where you should be with your career or something like that. Like, I don't know anyone that has just like magically stepped into a 6-figure role. I don't know any business owner who hasn't failed at like a handful of ideas before they come up with a good one, so really reframing how you approach things that way. The baby steps are really what help you get to, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
For sure. You mentioned budgets not feeling restrictive. How? Dear God, how?
Yeah. So I think thinking of and in my book, I'm like, if you don't like the word budget, if that like makes you cringe, don't call it that.
Right.
I've heard it called a prosperity plan instead, which has a much nicer ring to it. I think a budget or whatever you want to call it is really just a tool a way you can map out how your income relates to goals that you have. And those goals are going to be different for everyone, right? Whether they're one-off savings goals, whether they're revolving savings goals, which you would set up something called a sinking fund. This is for things that you're spending money on, not every month, but you still want to save for. A good example of that is like holiday gifts. So now is a great time to start a sinking fund for holiday gifts or vacations. So whether it's those types of savings goals or an investment goal, or you're really trying to just like crush whatever debt you have, it's much easier to come up with a plan for those things once you have a solid understanding of how your income's allocated. So that's all a budget's really allowing you to do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, again, you don't have to be tracking like every single category of spending that you have. I think as long as you have a realistic sense of where your spending normally goes or what your sort of the parameters you're willing to spend within, then it becomes really easy to come on again with just this weekly spending cap that you're using. So you're not worrying, about $50 here and $20 here. You're really just keeping track of that one number either manually or mentally in your head once you get comfortable with it. And that's something that's worked really well for clients that I work with because they're not, just constantly nickel and diming themselves. And they know that they've already, because they're able to automate a lot of the rest of their finances, they're able to have a sense of comfort knowing that they've already met, their major expenses, their credit card bill, what have you.
Do you have any suggestions of apps or tools that people can use? And because you've mentioned automating before, that usually goes with the bank that that you're working with, but yeah, any kind of supplementary resources that, beyond your book, of course.
Yeah. In terms of actually automating your finances, you're usually going to have to go through the lenders for that. I'm totally biased, but in terms of keeping track of all of that, obviously Rocket Money would be my go-to. There's, people nowadays generally have multiple accounts, multiple credit cards. And so being able to see all of that in one place is really helpful. So Rocket Money would certainly be my suggestion for that.
A word that you used that I love is freedom. And you say in your book, I teach readers how to overcome financial challenges and find their own versions of freedom. So how did you do that for you, for yourself, or suggestions for folks like who can wrap their head around what freedom looks like, feels like for them?
I think financial freedom, a lot of times, especially for those that might be more familiar with the personal finance community, a lot of people are talking about financial freedom in the terms of early retirement. And that is not a realistic goal for a lot of people. I'm not saying it's totally unattainable. I certainly talk about it in my book, but a lot of people might be, trying to optimize their finances later in life. And so maybe they've sort of missed that window, so to speak. I think financial freedom for me personally means, feeling comfortable and confident with your finances and being able to make strategic decisions as circumstances change. I think the first taste of financial freedom I had was really when I came up with a plan to pay down my debt. And I think that's important to underscore because it seems like light years, away now. But I think even at the time, I still had all the debt, but just coming up with a plan to do that sort of gave me a sense of control that I could then implement and sort of attack it in that way. So I think it's important to underscore that financial freedom will mean different things to different people, but that it doesn't mean that you don't have to attain that goal to feel better about it, to feel more confident in your money or just comfortable with how you're spending.
That's great. That's great. Do you have any success stories? I mean, I know they're in the book, but just from clients you've worked with, where you've seen them, in some capacity shift the way that they're approaching a challenge and then, stay with it?
Yeah. Man, I've definitely had some rock star clients. I'm trying to think of a story or two in particular. I mean, I think something that's interesting, I hear frequently from clients. So I do offer, I have a 90-day coaching program that's one-on-one coaching. So basically I run my clients through, we map out all their finances. We come up with that money move structure that I spoke about. I help them automate it. I think that's lifted a huge weight off a lot of their shoulders. But I think also some of the more interesting changes that happen are really like these aha moments, particularly when it comes to especially for people that have been in debt for a while, they're just so used to feeling that weight on their chest that they forget about once that's paid off, all of a sudden it's like you have all this more income, right? Even though that may not necessarily be the case because your money's no longer going towards that debt. And for the clients that I've been able to work with, even within a 90-day period and, figure out how to pay off one of their credit cards or something like that, that can be a total game changer. And some of the other aha moments related to investing, even just this past week, a lot of people will think they're invested inside of a Roth IRA or traditional IRA, but they haven't actually selected those investments. How I explain that in the book is if you think of an account like going to a restaurant, right? You could walk into the restaurant, you could take your wallet to the restaurant, so you can open an account, but until you've actually placed an order, until you've selected an investment, your money's not actually in a position to grow. It's probably sitting in a money market or a cash account. And so I've worked with quite a few clients who have discovered that maybe their money was just sitting there for years, but because I'm not able to provide specific financial advice, so I'll never recommend clients what to invest in, but guiding them on the educational factors and considerations that they might want to take into account to select those investments themselves, and being like, okay, you know what? I may have lost out on, a year or however many years of investing, or maybe, I wasn't totally on my A game with my finances before, but to see that transition and sort of the confidence that brings them moving forward is always some of my most exciting moments for them, because like we started off the session today, I think it's really easy to look at people that are good with money and think they've always been that way, and that's not the case. For the vast majority of people, everyone starts somewhere, everyone has different circumstances and challenges that they're up against, and I think a lot of people would be surprised, and probably even by tuning in, that's a first step as well, right? Deciding that they're going to learn and get more educated about money is huge. So commending everyone on the call But that's probably the most exciting changes that I've seen in clients, sort of seeing them gain that confidence.
Yeah. And one other thing I'd love to add, when you look at somebody who seems, quote, good with money or good at life or ambition or business or whatever it is, chances are they got there because it was actually really hard for them and they had to learn the tools to overcome that hardship, whether it was, an emotional hardship, financial, logistical, access, not to say that privilege doesn't play a role in this. Of course it does. But I do find, in the work that I do, whether it's my own clients or, in these conversations with coaches, so much of the growth or the aha moments came from I was stuck. I was in debt. I didn't have opportunity. Because otherwise, how do you figure this stuff out if not forced to figure it out?
Right. And quite frankly, get excited about it.
Yes.
Like, I didn't realize until after I paid down my debt just how fired up I was about, once that debt was paid off, it was like, oh, I got good at that thing. What can I reallocate that to now? And so, now I like to say I'm like low key fire because I do plan on retiring early, but it's only because I built that muscle initially from paying down my debt and sort of automating those transfers that I've been able to, segue that over to investing pretty aggressively now. And it all started with, that thing that literally caused me anxiety every day. Being in more debt than you make an entire year is rough. I'm not envious of that time in my life, but it was a useful time.
Yes, for sure. So in the final minutes, the question I ask every coach that comes on is, what do you believe are the fundamental elements of becoming your own biggest champion in work, money, life? It's all related. So I would say even just a definition of champion, it's really about self-advocacy. And there are a lot of ways to do it and a lot of skills that need to be built in order to do it. So you wrote in a whole long thing when I asked you it a while ago. I don't know if you remember everything you said, but in the final minutes, I'd love for you to share what you think those elements might be.
Sure. Yeah. And I remember the gist of it. I think it's an interesting question because sometimes it's hard to be your own champion, right? Sometimes it's hard to really have that confidence and believe that you can do something. But I think it feels like a trick even saying it out loud. But my biggest thing has always been to say yes to opportunities that come your way or yes to learning. I work in financial education. I'm a huge proponent of learning always. We all have more to learn all the time. So saying yes to opportunities or yes to learning opportunities that come your way and figuring out later, even though it might be scary, even though you might not feel like you have it figured out. So, going back to your question, you might not feel like the champion that you are all the time. Imposter syndrome is another thing that's really big, but it's certainly, speaking from personal experience, I think it's worked out well for me. I never thought I was going to write a book, and then an opportunity comes your way. So I guess in that, my overall advice would be don't cut yourself short, don't underestimate yourself, and sort of go for the gusto when those opportunities come up.
I love it. Final minute, anything else you'd like to share? / where can people find you, follow you, and most importantly, pay you?
Thank you. I would love for people, if they're interested in my book, to check that out. You can find it pretty much anywhere major books are sold: Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, but I've compiled them all on my website at beworthfinance.com. That's BE, like Beworth the investment. You can also find more information about my courses and coaching services there. I'll be opening up another cohort for one-on-one coaching this fall, but there's a wait list you can join now to make sure you don't miss out on that. And in terms of reaching out to me, I'm big on Instagram and social media, so you can follow me at Beworth Finance or email me anytime at info@beworthfinance.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Kimberly. I know people weren't here live, but they are definitely going to be watching after the fact. And if you'd like to comment below, ask questions, engage, put your resources. You just dropped a lot of really great knowledge, and super excited about your book. And as one author to another, Congratulations. That shit is hard.
Thank you.
Woo, but it is so ultimately worth it, both, I'm sure, for the things you learned about yourself, in the process of writing it, but you're going to get the best emails from people who are impacted by it, and it just means the world. So thank you for that. Thank you to all for watching. I appreciate you. Now go get paid. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.